Good morning. Let me just make sure everyone can hear me all right. Is the sound okay? Yes? Very good. So good morning. My name is Mark Freeman, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Institute for Integrated Transitions. And it's my great pleasure and privilege to moderate a special panel today that will be very quick, but I'm sure very insightful. We have 45 minutes to talk about challenges facing civil society on a global level right now, and some ideas around protecting and expanding civic space in these times. Civic space is probably a very technical concept, but when we say civic space, what we're talking about basically are the conditions that are needed for non-governmental actors, society in general, to participate in public life. And there's been a closing of that space in a lot of places as challenges to democracy have grown in many parts of the world. So without further ado, I'm going to go one by one to each of the panelists and introduce them as I move through the conversation, and we'll hopefully have a little bit of time at the end for some questions and answers from all of you in the audience. And so I'm going to begin with you, George. Giórgos Papandréou will be known to many or perhaps all of you, the former Prime Minister of Greece, and is currently the General Rapporteur on Democracy for the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly. And just to kick things off, George, if you would, maybe just tell us a little bit from your own leadership experience and your own current work as General Rapporteur on Democracy, how you think about the importance and the role of civil society and the importance of civic space to a democracy.
Very important, and I'm honored to be here with Trisha and with Pedro and Maria Teresa, and thank you, Mark. I've been looking at this from the point of view as General Rapporteur for Democracy, but also as my experience as a politician and also during the financial crisis. I would say one basic issue, from Aristotle all the way to Dr. Luke Kemp recently, who has studied history over the eons, the big issue of inequality is one of the most damaging for democracy and for civic space. We are seeing that the inequality brings a sense of injustice. It also creates a sense of populism and demagoguery, and it disintegrates a sense of belonging and community. But it does something else, and I've seen it in the financial crisis, which I dealt with. We have, with inequality, a huge concentration of wealth. We have that today globally. It's really an amazingly immoral concentration, I would say, of wealth. But that then translates into a concentration of power. So, to be very clear, the huge concentration of power by certain corporations or oligarchs around the world comes back into our nations to buy up our TV stations, buy up football or baseball or whatever other teams, to buy up cultural venues, and of course either lobby or even corrupt politics, justice, and the security systems. So that concentration of power immediately undermines civic space. Civic space and public space are a little bit different. Civic space, I would say, is the power that people have in organized society. So it would be the labor unions, it would be the NGOs, it would be people's associations, forms of activism, movements. That has been narrowed very much by the concentration of power. Now, the public space is the place where we talk like this. This is our public space. I just want to go back to ancient Greece one more time. In public space, you need an ecosystem of debate. So there was a big debate between Socrates and another sophist. He was a spin doctor of the time. He was a good rhetorician. His name was Gorgias. And Gorgias was saying, I can teach rhetoric to anybody. They can, convince you of anything. And Socrates says, for what reason? He said, well, I want to convince people they can win a debate, they can dominate, they can get money, they can get power. He said, but is that the reason of debate? Shouldn't it be to respect each other, to understand each other, to look for common solutions, to try to find what truth is? So they were talking about an ecosystem of public space. What is our ecosystem of public space today? It's not really here. Our public space today has been taken over by the digital space. And the digital space is controlled, again, and here in Europe, we have our digital space, but it's controlled either by US big corporations or by TikTok, which is partly or is Chinese. But it's not only that, the rules of the ecosystem are these algorithms. And these algorithms produce a machine learning for a specific purpose, and the specific purpose is profit. Now that is not the central issue of democracy or a public space. The central issue of democracy is to have real discussion, real debate, real understanding, and that's why I think this is where the solution should be. Should we take back control of the public space? And how should we do that? Should we use AI for deliberation? Should we use AI for democratic participation? Should we have a radical view of democracy? Radical in the view of thinking differently, radically differently, not in a violent way, of really giving back inclusivity and debate and rules of debate which allow for true free speech and not just bullying and hate speech and polarization, which we're seeing. So I think these are the issues we really have to look at if we want to bring back both civic and our public space for our citizens and not for just profit making or in the end autocrats who use it for influencing our citizens. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, George, first of all, for taking us all the way back to ancient Greece, where many of the ideas around civic space and public space were written of, and also for reminding us that civic space isn't just physical space, it's also digital space. So let me maybe now turn to you, Maria Teresa Kumar, who is the president and CEO of Voto Latino. And this year's Paris Peace Forum, the central theme is about new coalitions. So wanted to invite you to share your thoughts, drawing from your own work, on whether new coalitions are part of what is needed in order to protect and expand civic space.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you to the Peace Forum for having hard conversations in times where folks are afraid to speak candidly in the moment we're living in. I have to really put everything in perspective because coming from the US, we always think that the center of gravity is democracy. And I'm humbled here by George to remind us that no, it was ancient Greece. And so the fact that we're only on the road for 250 years, we're doing okay. Thank you. But, let me just preface. Voto Latino was started when I was 28 years old, and it was because it was the first time in the United States that Latino growth was going to be the second largest demographic of Americans, and the majority of them were not immigrants, but they were US born. And so for the last 2 decades, the US population growth, 52% of it has been because of the Latino community. Latinos, every 30 seconds, a Latino turns 18 years old. When we talk about the Latino community and what is happening right now in the forces of our politics, if I were to have a plot graph here and say that the most common age among whites is 58 years old in the United States, the most common age of blacks in the US is 32. I'm glad most of you are sitting down because the most common age of Latinos in the United States is 14 years old. So we are literally almost 3 generations younger than the people in power. And this influx of Americans who happen to be Latino, who are not written in any history, allows for nefarious activity to inject in the public bloodstream of what an American is, what an American should look like, despite the fact that even in Arkansas, a tiny little state, in some counties, 70% of the kids in schools are Hispanic. So the United States is going through a massive transformation. And when we talk about what are those new coalitions, what we're talking about is an absolute experiment that started in Greece, of a multicultural democracy. And when a multicultural democracy in America is working, I don't have to talk to you about 20 years past. I could talk to you about the 2018 elections, when the very first time a multicultural coalition of Americans did not like what was happening in the White House. And for the very first time, our chamber in the US Congress had the most diverse set of Americans, the most women, the most Muslim, the most veterans, the youngest chamber. And it was because a multicultural America, where young people led the way, transformed our politics. And then we came up with 400 pieces of legislation that actually spoke to American values. We addressed the issue of gun reform, of making sure that women had access to health care, of climate change. But because it was left in the congressional chamber of the US Congress, the US Senate, that was controlled by the far right, didn't let that legislation pass. So a multicultural America, when again, in the middle of a pandemic, again led disproportionately by young people, and changed the fabric of America. And what we saw recently then was that despite this legislation that passed, and I'll say it's historic, it was actually close to $1 trillion in investment just when it came to clean energy. It was transformative. When George speaks of the poisoning of our social media and our perceptions of who we are and how we are, it is not small. Voto Latino, we have registered over 2 million folks since our founding in battleground states, because in the United States you have to register. The government doesn't automatically do it. And then we basically, in the last 2 elections, we were able to mobilize over 5 million people, but through this lens of American values. And the challenge right now is that the amount of disinformation that's coming back from the far right and also from foreign interference is creating incredible friction, so that disproportionately young people are getting targeted, saying that the institutions don't work. Step aside, don't participate. In the last election, the headline read that Latinos voted for Trump. In fact, what we saw was that 1/3 of the Latinos who did vote voted for Trump, for Kamala Harris, but more importantly, and this is what people really need to pay attention to, 1/3 of Latinos who voted in 2020 didn't vote at all. That's opportunity. And so when we talk about coalition right now, what's happening when it comes to the federal government and people see the militarization of our cities, someone asked me very clearly, it's like, you suppose that the people in the military uniforms are okay with what is happening. So we've been doing more increasing research, and we're learning that they're doing a job, but they're not comfortable with it. So it's an opportunity for us to start looking at unlikely allies to bring us together, to make sure that we can have conversations about what are those fundamental principles of being American, of participating, and mobilization. And one of the things that I think is absolutely unique that is happening globally is that for the very first time, Generation Z is a larger voting bloc potential than baby boomers.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Maria Teresa, also for bringing some important statistics from where you do your work, and also for pointing out to the multi-generational dimension of thinking about new coalitions. And we'll come back to that, I think, also on this panel. Let me now move to you, Pedro. So Pedro Abramovay is the Vice President of Programs at Open Society Foundations. And just wanted to invite you, Pedro, perhaps to share about the direct experience that you're having and challenges of civic space as the Open Society Foundations. And maybe if you would also, since you're a global foundation, talk about, and since you're a foundation, talk about, if you can, very briefly, philanthropy's role with regard to civic space in light of the collapse of international aid.
No, thank you very much, Mark, and such a pleasure to be here in this wonderful panel. So we see the movement of authoritarian leaders working hard to shrink civic space in many parts of the world. And they have clear targets, right, which are the targets that block them or try to block their kind of authoritarian journey. And it is the judiciary, the press, and civil society, right? And we see that being repeated in many different parts of the world. And it is very important to notice that in places in which we've seen resistance, and we've seen resistance in many parts of the world, it is exactly an alliance between those three elements to resist authoritarianism that can produce the resistance, right? So it is when civil society can work to protect the press, when the press is investigating and giving also feeding into the ability to counter power, and when the judiciary is being independent, that we are seeing the resistance happen. Speaking, for example, from Brazil, right, where I come from, where we've seen kind of an attempt of a coup d'etat, right, and not only an authoritarian leader, but someone who tried to kill the elected president, tried to really overturn president through the force. The resistance came exactly through those spaces. And the ability to exactly create that fertile environment for resistance comes from a strong civil society, and this strong civil society needs support, right? So philanthropy right now has, of course, a hard choice to make, because, of course, part of the authoritarian agenda is exactly to attack philanthropy and to make sure that everyone that funds something that is controversial, that is targeted. And we've seen some philanthropies doing the kind of more conservative step of saying, so we won't fund issues around women's rights, we won't fund things, issues around democracy. And by doing that, they're only strengthening the authoritarian leaders. So I think what and especially, of course, in the context of reducing cooperation. So I think those two elements, which is U.S. cooperation being closed, European cooperation being reduced to invest in defense, and philanthropies accepting, right, some of the pressure of those governments to move to a more, a less controversial agenda is the most dangerous element, I think, for the shrink of civic space right now. So from Open Society Foundations, we've been targeted from many authoritarian leaders. We're very proud of our enemies in many parts of the world. Particularly in the U.S., right, we've seen a lot of attacks on us, and we know it's not an attack on the Open Society Foundation. It is an attack on the people who are resisting. It is an attack, right? They use Open Society Foundation as a scapegoat, right, to really attack the people who are resisting and trying to preserve and rebuild American democracy. I think the message that we have is that we will not bend, right? We will resist that. I think being the privileged space, which is being philanthropy, which is not the space of being kind of we're not putting our bodies, right, in the resistance. The grantees are doing the work, are litigating, are protecting women, are working to protect human rights defenders all over the world. So being the privileged space of philanthropy, we need to be conscious of that and use that privilege exactly to continue to resist in a moment like that. Being absolutely sure that everything we're doing is in full compliance with the law, right? We have good teams that make sure we are full compliance with the law. So it's not about complying with the law, but it is making sure that we still believe in democracy in the U.S., for example, that we still believe that institutions in the United States will be able to resist those attacks, and they only will be able to resist if we are courageous enough to fight back.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Pedro. I think coming out of a very direct experience that you're having as Open Society Foundations, can hear that also, of course, in how you're approaching this through a lens primarily of resistance. So thank you very much for sharing that perspective. And let me maybe now just move to you. So Trisha Shetty is the founder and president of She Says, as well as the president of the steering committee of this Paris Peace Forum. And Trisha, I'm going to pick up, again, also because of the nature of your own work as the president of She Says, to talk about a little bit generational dimensions, generational shifts that you are observing or that you think are needed when it comes to civil society itself. How do you see the role of younger generations? How do you experience the role of younger generations when it comes to civil society? Is there a different view of what civil society's role is in a democracy with younger generations? We've heard a couple of comments about that already.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the interventions you've had before. You know, when I first started She Says, it's an organization that fights for rights of equality for women and children who've been sexually abused and just forward gender rights. In the very beginning when we launched, I was asked, what's your 10-year plan? And I said, my 10-year plan is to shut down my shop. I have quite a bit of a radical view on civil society, which is we exist because of deficiencies in government. As a member of civil society, I don't want to be so good that I replace state apparatus. Without taking names, there are many big, huge NGOs that enter quote-unquote democratic spaces, sanitize the image of world leaders only because they don't look at us as citizens who need access to human rights, and you can make a deduction on whom they look as citizens based on our skin color, based on the religion we profess to, based on our geography, but they look at us as consumers that they want access to. So for me, civil society shouldn't be so efficient that it's okay if my judiciary doesn't work, that it's okay if I go to the police station and that person is not equipped to answer me, that it's okay if my media has crumbled because there is civil society here. No, that doesn't work. I remember I was once called to speak at Qatar, and for Women's Day, a few days before my talk, I get a call. Du coup, you speak a lot about rape. Can you not talk about rape? Can you talk about gender equality? This is not just a testament to Qatar. I've heard this time and again. In my country, the only civil society spaces that are fully open and functioning are the ones that are fighting for equality without calling out the pervasive inequality. How can you fight for equality without calling out inequality, which is funded? This inequality is not accidental, it's funded. And what does this inequality look like? As Pedro rightfully highlighted, there are 3 branches. Look, you can't talk about human rights without a democratic framework, right? There are 3 branches. There's the media, there's civil society, there's the law. Media is completely controlled by state-sponsored media. The stuff that we have been seeing over the past 10 years is now what America and the European continent is facing. It's not lost on me that we're holding these panels now when it's getting tough here. We've been raising the clarion call for a long time and saying, pay attention, pay attention. No one did. You talk about civil society, the first thing they accuse us of is, oh, your foreign-funded NGOs. Your foreign-funded NGOs, you have a foreign-funded agenda. You talk about law. We don't have an independent judiciary, sadly, and which is what you're right now seeing in America as well. The bastions that we thought of democracy are sadly crumbling down. And I'll come back to how it's funded. How many of you hear about Pegasus? Pegasus? Okay? It was the largest global attack for silencing journalists, human rights defenders, politicians. One of the people that got spied upon in India was a person who was working for the Supreme Court at that point, who alleged sexual harassment against our Chief Justice of India. 11 members of her immediate family and her phone were stabbed under Pegasus, and the said Chief Justice then retired and became a member of Parliament with the current ruling administration. Who else was spied upon by Pegasus? 10 Downing Street was spied upon by Pegasus. Do you know who else was spied upon by Pegasus in France? President Macron was spied upon by Pegasus. Who has funded Pegasus? It's an NSO official spyware by Israeli government, and they said we only lend our spyware out to other governments. So we need to have the courage to call the problem for what it is and recognize that when we talk about civil society, we treat the Global South, and when I talk about Global South, I don't mean it from an economic perspective, but more so from a geographic perspective, differently than the Global North. I'll leave it back for solutions later.
Okay. No, well, thank you for sharing that, Tricia. And it actually goes directly to a question that I'll just invite any of you who, as panelists to react to. I mean, and then we should have about 10 minutes for question and answer from the audience. I mean, a lot of this panel is set up, and some of your comments, of course, also address threats to civil society, threats to civic space that are external. The question I guess I'd like to pivot to a little bit and invite your reflections on is maybe threats that are internal to civil society. Because, and I'll give a little bit of context for this, and George, you in fact mentioned polarization. Others have mentioned also about challenges of disinformation and in the digital space, aspect of civic space. we have my organization has a global initiative on polarization, and it's something that was set up a number of years ago because of the growth of illiberal views, anti-democratic views on the left and on the right. There's even a concept that you may be familiar with of uncivil society. Civil society is the good and the bad, the left and the right, the radicals and the moderates. And so I wanted to just see, just so that we don't end up, of course, and I think, Tricia, you set that up well. I mean, we shouldn't take a romanticized view of a civil society, and we should also very clearly understand where civic space and civil society's role should end and where government's role should begin. But are there, I guess the short question I'd want to ask to all of you is, I mean, how do you think about threats from within civil society that have to do with intolerance, which is the exact opposite of the idea of open society? Free expression, free debate, viewpoint diversity. Is there internal homework that civil society has to do? It goes to the New Coalition's point as well. How do you think about internal reforms that may be needed within civil society itself as part of rebuilding and strengthening and protecting the best form of civic space in a democracy? So would anyone like to jump in on that?
I can take a stab at it. I think one of the biggest challenges from the perspective of the population, if you were to ask the majority of humans, what is civil society, they can't answer it. And if you're to look at a thriving democracy, you actually need you need 4 pillars, right? You have, again, taking the example of the US, you have the Supreme Court, you have Congress, and you have the president. But then you also have the 4th estate, which is considered the press. That is a 4th pillar. But then the 5th pillar is absolutely civil society. It is philanthropics, is where you are trying to basically meet the gaps that that government has left behind. But to your point earlier, George, the inequality is so massive that civil society cannot keep up. In the next couple of weeks, what you're going to see on front pages are federal workers in the United States standing in line for food. Of the richest country in the world, it's a choice. It's obscene. And so while we can exercise all the bad things that are happening, I also do think that there is a different consciousness right now happening globally, where whether you see it among young people marching around the globe, whether you see them uprising in the United States, and that is recognizing that the current structures that served us so well in the 20th century are not working for us in the 21st century. And because you have a socialization of people paying attention, saying, what do we need? What do we need to move forward? It's an opportunity for us to reimagine our institutions. Oftentimes you hear politicians saying, we have to protect our institutions. But when the institutions are failing you at a fundamental level, what is there to protect? Instead, how can we reimagine it? Where we start saying, how can we reimagine success? What does progress really look like collectively? And those are tough questions when you do have nefarious actors trying to pit us against each other so that they can pilfer our coffers. Because that's all that is happening. When people say, why are people trying to divide us globally? It's so that the people at the very, very top, controlling industry and controlling power, could make more money while we're distracted with the crumbs.
Honestly, I appreciate that you've asked this question. As a member of civil society, I tell you, I fundamentally disagree with the premise of this question. Civil society members are not going around arresting people on the streets, killing people on the streets, posing a real threat to democracy. We must pin the tail of the donkey. It's the heads of states. No one here voted for civil society. OSF, one of the largest organizations internationally. Did anyone vote for you? Are you taking taxpayer money? No one has voted for me. No one has given me a taxpayer money. Accountability lies with the people who you have voted for, whom you are giving your taxpayer money to. So we must hold those people accountable. You want to talk about threats? I have comrades in jail right now. We have people that have been killed by state-sponsored attacks, by media disinformation. When media calls us terrorists, when media calls us anti-national, who do you think comes and attacks us? Whose life is under threat? OSF has been banned in how many countries? It's a very cute way to say, oh, we're proud of our enemies, but there are real threats that go after the founders of such organizations, people who work for such organizations. They won't say it because they're doing the hard work behind the scenes. But you think it's easy to run an organization like that, where you're constantly being subject to anti-Semitic attacks, where your life is constantly being under threat? Why? Because you dare to speak up for human rights? No, so who are the threats? It's the governments whose image we are sanitizing. That is the real problem. And let's be also serious about this. Civil society, 1 out of every 50 members of UNRWA have been killed, the staff of UN. It's the highest number of UN staff that has been killed in the United Nations history. Who killed these people? There's a genocide underway where civil society has been put under attack, and we don't have the gumption to call out those killers. And we as civil society are being asked to pass some absurd litmus test about what we should do to house clean. No, hold those accountable who are sanitizing their image and playing the game for these authoritarian leaders who are attacking our civil society space. Not people like us who are putting our body, mind, sanity, safety on the risk, on the front lines for nothing, only to be called as terrorists and terrorist sympathizers.
Okay, well, again, this is in the spirit of debate. I think this is very important input and contribution. George, you also wanted to react?
I feel for Tricia, and I agree with her on many things. Of course, I've been elected and I've been accountable. But I also think that we need, Tricia, to add to this where power lies. And sometimes what we are seeing, and this is, I think, the problem in our democracies today, they are not working, not because democracy is bad, but they are captured by other powers. When we see an Elon Musk playing a game with politics and owning Twitter, buying Twitter, I said, why doesn't the European Parliament buy Twitter? You know, make it a fourth, I've even proposed, let's make a fourth deliberative branch where citizens can actually, we can use platforms where we do policies. When I was Prime Minister, I did something we called wiki laws. So what do I do? Every law, every single law we were discussing, before it went to Parliament, we would put it online, ask people to give their views, and then bring back their views, see what we could adapt from them, and then put into, give it to Parliament. Can we make that a fourth branch of government where citizens actually have a voice about policies? So we need a real radical, as you said, Maria Teresa. I think it's not just restoring what democracy is. Let's rethink democracy. That brings me back a little bit to ancient times again. What was politics? Because we've lost the word. Politics is a bad word today. It's a dirty word. No, in politics it means citizens being able to vote, to decide for their own future. Imagination. Have imagination about what a better future is and be able collectively to do so. And then democracy came as an invention saying, okay, if we want to make sure that we can imagine a better future and not some tyrant or some other king or something decide for us, we need a democracy to disrupt the concentration of power. The concentration of power in ancient Athens was an abuse to the gods. It was an abuse, it was an anathema to the gods, and it was considered to be a sin. So that all the construction of democracy then, and things like citizens' assemblies that existed then, were to try to undermine the concentration of power, which we see so much today. I will just want to give an example, because you talked about the open society. I monitor Hungary in the Council of Europe. So how did Orban, how did it happen? He was elected, there was a democratic election when he got a big supermajority. What he was able to do with his supermajority is change the constitution, control the judiciary. Then he started controlling media. He used government funding to advertise on media to keep them quiet. He got his friends to create a big media group, and then he had used the media control, which every country has one form or another, to give licenses to attack those he did not like, particularly civil society ones. He attacked civil society. He has created an operation which says, civil society, they are enemies of our country. And the first organization they attacked as an enemy of the country was Transparency International. Why? Because it was looking at the corruption that Orban was doing. And of course, he's now controlling universities and museums. So that became Heritage 2025. They used that model, and that's what the model is being now used in the United States. Now, what is he doing? If you listen to Orban, he will talk about LGBTQ, terrible, migrants, terrible. Foreign policy, all these foreigners, Soros and so on, terrible. The real, that's a smokescreen for me. That is a smokescreen. The real issue is his power and his money. That is the problem. So I think we need to think of a radical transformation of our democracies, and that is bring citizens in. That's going to be a fight. That's not a technical issue. That's not just saying, we just passed a law. That is a struggle today, and it also is a struggle to bring in, to change our public spaces. We need public spaces for debate, not for hate speech and division. I just want to say, you talked about the division, polarization, you talk about that also. Polarization is the currency for autocrats. They love dividing society, whether it's black, white, Latino, colored, whatever. They want, whether it's gender, they want to divide society. That's how they control. So I think we who are progressives, okay, we should respect differences, but not make them divisive. So I think that's where we, on the progressive side, need to think about it. We need to unite against where the real power is and love diversity, but unite together against these power centers.
Thank you, Giorgio. And just, if I may, just go to you, Pedro, and then we'll have about 5 or 6 minutes for questions.
That's right.
and answers.
I'll try to be quick. No, I think it is. I think Trisha's point is very important, right? I think definitely we can't even give the impression that there is equal polarization between the authoritarian state and civil society who is resisting, right? And I'm sure that's definitely not what Mark was implying with the question, right? I think what's happening in Gaza, I mean, again, I come from Rio. Yesterday in Rio, the governor linked to Bolsonaro did a police operation that killed almost 100 people in the city. The city was completely, collapsed by the police operation, and our grantees are right now counting bodies, right, and trying to see how to resist. So we can't say that because they are complaining about police violence, there is an equal polarization between what they are proposing and what the state. But it is true, and I take George's point, that we need to reclaim, I think, the idea of politics, and we need civil society to be political. Because to be political, and the beauty of politics and of democracy is the idea that we recognize that we have a shared destiny with the rest of our society. And once you do that, you know that you can't, and it's not about how we polarize or not the state, but yes, you need to convince and you need to bring along the whole of the society, right? You need to speak to people that are outside, and I think that's very important. And then I think it is what Maria Teresa was speaking about, right? We need not only to say we need to protect and we need to look at, the beauty of the law that came many times from outside, but we need to look into people's life and what will make people's life better. And sometimes it is talking about rape, sometimes it is talking about the socioeconomic challenge that people are facing. And civil society has the ability to do that. So I think it's not only that we can't polarize. We need to polarize, of course, against authoritarianism. But inside the society, we need to be political, and we need to understand that we need to bring people along if we want to resist the concentration of power that we are seeing in many places.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for this informal interaction that we managed to have. We've got 5 minutes, so let me just see if there's any comments or questions. So I'm not sure the format. You go ahead. I think we may have time for 2 very quick questions. We have 6 minutes left in the panel.
Yes, thank you for your speeches, really interesting. And the power you recognize in civil society is really important. My question is about Russian civil society. I'm president of NGO that is declared undesirable in Russia, a French NGO. And you know that after the stop of US aid support to Russian civil society, there were no any urgent plan to support Russian resistance, and it's still going, it's still existing. So it seems to us that the choice was most to invest in defense, in military defense, and not in civil society, a kind of stop of trust that civil society can still do something in Russia. How do you analyze it and why?
And maybe we can just take one more question. I think we may have time for.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is to Tricia. In your submission, you said that your 10 years goal was to close. And my question is, what happened? Is it that most civil societies, like she says, are still unable to prevent the problem identified, but always searching for cure? And why are civil societies not utilizing the digital space, like Mr. Giórgos, if I'm right, said, to mobilize solutions like the Gen Zs are currently doing?
Great, thank you. Well, Tricia, there was a direct question for you, so why don't we start there, and then we can just let other colleagues react, and we'll have to be very, very quick. I apologize.
So thank you for the question. Just quickly, in terms of coalitions, the Paris Peace Forum, the reason I have a lot of faith in the Paris Peace Forum is they have actually brought coalitions to address Russia's attack on the sovereignty of Ukraine, as well as over the years consistently held conversations and protected civil society spaces here. As of right now, we have coalitions happening to address very much the conflict within Russia and Ukraine, as well as Israel and Gaza. So that does give me hope in terms of coalitions. To answer your question, we had Gujarat riots that happened a long time ago where a woman was gang raped. And she was gang raped, multiple members of her family were killed in front of her, her 8-year-old child was killed. Her convicts were arrested. After being arrested, 2 years ago during our Independence Day, they were let go on grounds of good behavior. I was back home in India back then. We held protests. The police called up my father to say, control your daughter. He said, what will you do? They said, he'll arrest me. He said, go ahead, arrest her, we'll bring food. My family is right next to me, we're fighting back. What is the solution? We fight back. We're not bending the knee, we're fighting back. They have their strategies, we have our constitution, we have our coalitions, and history. I don't know if we will win. I'm not fighting to win. I'm fighting to resist. I'm fighting to resist because that's my goal. I don't know what winning looks like, but I know what resistance looks like. And for that, we need coalitions. For that, we need solidarity.
Thank you, Tricia. We have a couple of minutes left according to the screen, so does anyone else
I would just briefly, one of the things that when we started was very much resistance in the last term under President Trump. And I actually encourage everyone to think about what we need to do. That's the absolute opposite. We need to occupy. We need to register. We need to participate, and we need to occupy the halls of Congress, the halls of power, the halls of the EU, the halls, because it is with our mindset of collaborative effort, of coalition building, that when we occupy, we can change the narrative and the future of where we're going. I think oftentimes people, rightfully so, get tired, and they want to get opt out of government and say that this is too hard. But that is the strategy of the other side, because guess what they're doing? They're right now successfully occupying all the chambers of Congress, all the chambers of communal. They're encouraging and ensuring that there's messages that pollute our ability to act. And so instead of resisting, I encourage us to find strategies so that we could occupy those chambers and move forward together.
I just want to follow the spirit of Tricia, the fight. I think the worst thing we could do is to say, we can't change anything. Terrible. All politicians or politics is bad. That is the worst thing we could do. We need to fight. I say that not just as a politician. I say that I've been in civil society often in my region. And I want to link it also to the Russian question. I worked on Greek-Turkish relations. We had our animosities. I was foreign minister. You know what I felt was the most important thing? When there was an earthquake and we decided to help Turkey, and all of a sudden there was a flourishing of civil society working together, women's groups, sports, business, local government. It was amazing. And if you could get just the citizens together, they want peace. When I would go as foreign minister representing the European Union to Israel and Palestine. The first people I met, I didn't go to the authorities, were women's groups. They were together, Israelis and Palestinian women, and they together were telling us what the solution was. Then I would go to the officials, mostly men, and they would be fighting. So we need to support civil society. So my simple thing is just to reiterate what Trisha's you're doing great work. Trisha, thank you for and of course both of you and Maria Teresa and Pedro. We need civil society to believe in yourself, in ourselves. We need to believe in ourselves and our potential and our power. Don't give up the fight. In any way participate. Actually, in ancient Greece, to go back to ancient Greece, sorry, my big fat Greek wedding, but the word private was idiotis, so it gets to the word idiot. So people were seen a bit peculiar. Why aren't you involved? Why aren't you part of society? That is what authoritarians want. Don't let them get their way. Thank you.
Well, thank you, George. And thank you to all the panel. We're actually out of time, so I think I have to officially close it, but maybe I'll just invite the audience to just applaud and thank our panelists today.